Hello and welcome everyone to the second production vlog for Colors of the Wind, a dystopian animation short film that I'm working on. Today I want to talk a little bit about my 2D animation production workflow. I will probably not cover everything. I won't cover everything because it's just too much, but I want to give you an overview of the techniques I'm using and how I try to combine it with my visual style. So this time I'm also recording my face because I will be waving around with my hands in order to explain certain aspects probably. So let's get started. As you can see, this is Photoshop CS6, my favorite go-to painting tool. And how I start out, I usually take a rough sketch or a photograph for the scene I'm working on, and I paint a mood image, basically. Well, it has some established design elements in it, so it's not as much mood as it is a final. It could serve as a final template for the animation. And if it survives my process, then it stays within the movie, but sometimes I will change a couple of things afterwards, but I will explain on the way. So this image, as you see now here, is basically what I use as a still image, and then my thoughts go into the direction of asking myself, okay, what's the motion here? How much can I animate? How much can I stretch this image and put it into an animation? Because with the process I'm using, you have a lot of limitations because it's purely 2D and it's not frame by frame, meaning whenever I have a change in angle, if there is a head turning motion, I can't repaint this. I could, but it would take huge amounts of time. For this problem, I am developing a 3D pipeline, but it's not ready for display yet. So in order to stay economic and to stay on target, which is actually to make a movie, I have to make a couple of compromises, quote unquote, because in the end, I'm not even sure if it's that much of a compromise, because I really like the art style of 2D puppet animation or parallax animation, which I'm using here. So yeah, this is basically my still image, and in this scene the character is supposed to look up and look into the scenery, and it's just a slow tilt of the head, and basically, this is all the motion there is, all the primary motion, but of course you have a lot of secondary motion that I can animate with the technique perfectly well, which could be dust in the background, fluttering of the clothes of the coat the protagonist is wearing, a little bit of lens flare. You can add many layers of different movements that can distract the eye from all the technical mistakes that will come up in this animation process. When I've made up my mind about the motion that is possible with this image, I start to cut the character or the elements into smaller pieces. For instance, I have the background here. Let me disable. This is the background. There isn't that much detail because I won't care about the background. In my head, it's probably already out of focus. It's blurry and it's unimportant for this scene. So this is one layer, very rough, only colors. Then I have the chest because maybe there will be some breathing. So I have, how do you call it? Cut it out. Basically, I made my own layer about it. Then you have from our perspective, left side of the shoulder. Then there is the right side of the shoulder. Then you have I don't know how it's called, I'm missing the English word here, but you see what I mean. The top of the coat. Then what's really important for my personal style is shadows, animating shadows, because this gives you some extra layer of not only animation but also information, how far the objects are apart from each other and that there is movement. And the mask, of course. Then I thought, how can I increase the illusion of three-dimensionality, of depth. And the character has two, like a protective screen on top of his mask, and you probably won't see it, but I have, oops, this was the wrong layer, but I have created my own layer with it. And then you have some effects layer, like a shadow, a mask layer, because you will see in the process what this is for. Then a glow, another glow, and a lens flare, and yeah, dust. But we will only focus on the primary animation in this vlog, which is the character animation. When I have dissected this image into all its layers, and it's maybe important to say that I have to paint a little bit outside my scope of frame because there's a little bit more motion going on that fits in the frame. I export these images with all their transparencies and load them into my next tool, After Effects. And this is where stuff gets really complicated, or can get really complicated. Well, you can imagine it as following. If you look at this line here where my mouse is, this is basically my horizontal layering. So I do some stuff in one layer and it gets combined, and or in one composition, and I can import this composition to the next composition. And it helps me to basically stack effects on top of each other so that I don't kill myself with 1,000 effects in one composition, right? So for instance, in my first layer, I have this protective shielding and a shadow that moves across the protective shielding. So please excuse the low resolution, but my computer can just handle just a little bit. So if the shadow is supposed just to move upwards, it's a very, very simple animation, but combined it will make a huge effect, as you will see in the end. But the problem here is that I don't want the shadow to be displayed. I just want the shadow to be displayed on these protective shieldings. So I put this whole composition into the next composition with a mask, and this mask defines the area that will be shown in the end, and it will look like this. So it's a little bit more convincing because you don't see this shape, this static shape moving, but you see, your eye thinks, oh, there is a shadow disappearing from this shielding. Okay, so again, this gets squashed into a composition, and then I will throw it into the next composition. This composition, I have basically everything that I need for my character thrown on one composition because it's basically my main area of animation. And now it will be really funny because what I really like to use is called puppet animation. In After Effects, you have the possibility, let's take my mask for instance, and I'd like to show you. Yes, so as you remember, this is one layer, and I can give After Effects the command to make a mesh out of it. So basically make a, yes, how do you call it, like a, it's not a 3D object, but it's sort of 3D, it's just on one layer, on 2 dimensions. And I can assign pinpoints to this mesh, and with these pinpoints I'm able to manipulate it, the whole thing, and it interacts, and it interacts in a very organic way, which I really like, and it makes animation very, very easy because I don't have only static things that move against each other, but I can also deform the mesh a little bit, and this looks way more convincing. So for each pin I have created keyframes. These keyframes are informations, and they tell me to which period in the time, to which point in time this point will be found, or moves, from which point to which point it moves, and in which speed. So for instance, if I take my pin number 6, it's like a little pin here, and if I zoom in you can see the whole movement. So it follows a very, very strange line, and it's supposed to simulate wind, because I wanted the tubes to flutter in the wind, and usually motion follows certain movement patterns in this case, and it's something like a, I don't want to say spiral, but like a random spiral type of movement, and each turning point is described as a keyframe in my time frame here. So each of these rectangular dots basically is a keyframe, and it tells me, okay, this is this point, and you have this kind of tangent here. It describes the path. And if you want to go into more detail, you can just open the F curves dialog, and it tells me in which speed it transitions from one key point to the next key point. So maybe my explanation is not the best, but as you can see, there are many layers, and it's very mathematical to basically describe the motion. Luckily for me, there are a couple of ways for After Effects to automatize these things and make them a little bit easier for me and a little bit more intuitive. For instance, I can basically draw, I just discovered this recently, I can draw my paths in real time on my Wacom, which is a huge time saver, because it's just 1,000 times quicker and more intuitive to, imitate the movement of wind with my hand. If I get a point here and I select, yeah, this is the wind, and then a little bit stronger and it bends back, After Effects takes this information and translates it into these keyframes, which is really helpful. But if there's something off, but I still like the motion overall, I have the ability, the possibility to change it a little bit here and there. So all in all, for every layer I have at least 4 of these pinpoints. So the mask has like 7 pinpoints. What else? The shadow of the mask has 2 pinpoints only. This is the one supposed to move across the whole face. I will show it to you. The chest has, oh no, this is wrong. It has how many? 2 pinpoints. Yeah, the left and right parts have each like 4 pinpoints. So you have a lot of points, and for every point there's movement in terms of keyframes. So this is what I want to say. If you open everything up, you will lose the oversight of all these points, because it's just a lot of information. But I can still handle it on my own. So yeah, I will just, whoops, sorry, this was not supposed to happen. I will just let him render out this whole thing, and he will render every 5th image, because otherwise my performance will be cropped a little bit too much. But while this program is animating, you can see what's going on. So basically, the heads it's not really a movement. I've just stretched the mask so much that it looks like a head tilt. But in order to emphasize this, I added the shielding and the disappearing shadow on the shields. I added a shadow on the whole mask that is just moving upwards and slightly skewed. Not really skewed, it's distorted with this puppet animation tool. I added lens flare, I added glow that slowly increases here and there, and there is a lot of movement from the wind on the whole character. And all in all together, it creates the illusion of a head tilt of a person with a coat standing in the wind. And when the rendering is somewhat finished, you can see it in slow motion, so to speak. Yeah, so every 5th frame, and you can see how this illusion takes shape. And you don't, I think, for me at least, my eye buys the movement, because shadow is very indicative of movement. It helps the eye to understand where things are going. And this is part of my animation style and also my painting style. I love to work with hard shadows because they tell you so much about the geometry and the movement of the character. And if you somehow can make it move in your animation, it's even better, you know. And there is no 3D at all. And what I really like is this shadow disappearing from the shield, because it just gives you more depth for the character, more information to work with. But that's not all, of course. This is only the character movement. In order to, for instance, give the wind also a direction, I will later implement more particle effects like dust flying in the background, rain and snow flying from an angle. These are little things that I will add on top of the animation to give it even more believability, and also more information for the viewers, like about the conditions, the weather, the wind, and of course also you have sound then in the end. So this all will add up to create the illusion of a movie, basically. And also camera blur, which shifts the focus and can help me basically blend away or blur away mistakes that happen during animation. Because if you pay close attention, you will see that all these things are layers and they are cut apart. And I was thinking about, how do I approach it from an artistic point of view? And art for me is also the ability to shift the focus away from boring things in your image, because no one wants to see a boring animation. You want to have, it's like candy for the eye, right? So I want to cover the parts that are maybe uninteresting for the eye or uninteresting for the narrative or technically not as well solved as they could be. But you know, I'm restricted by time and many other things, so I have to, or I allow myself to use all the tools I have in order to make a high quality animation. So this is basically the next compositional stage apart from the character animation. This covers I basically took the whole animation and made it again, put pins on top of it. I made it a mesh and also animated this. So you're stacking animations on top of each other. So you're fooling the eye. You're putting so much primary, secondary, and tertiary. You know what I mean. Tertiary animation on top of each other, so that there's so much information going on that the eye doesn't have time to analyze it. But it's still enough time to actually understand what's going on. So this is the stage where basically the whole character moves upwards. Maybe you can see it a little bit. Unfortunately, it's low resolution because the computer has to render. And in this stage, I will probably add also more and more from the environment effects, from the particle effects. And the last stage is usually post effects, which mean I will increase the brightness. I will add some noise on top of it. So again, I have the graininess of a movie, of an analog movie format maybe, which I want to incorporate into this, so it feels not as digital. And I really love to add camera shaking to this, because you don't have super static cameras in real life. You always have a little bit of motion, some vibration or wind or whatever, and it might be super slight, but for me it's like psychovisually it still makes an impact. So this is the animation. I've run through all the steps. This is the animation I'm working on currently. I have exported this thing 37 times, not counting the in-program rendering. So you always have to export it and look at it in the final stage to figure out animation mistakes or timing mistakes, correct them, and export them again, look at it, and then change it. You always have this feedback loop, so this comes also into account. So there's a lot of work, but it's all right. I mean, I think per scene it took me maybe a day or something to animate the stuff, you can establish a rough animation super fast within an hour or two, but all the fine tuning takes a lot of time, and then in the end you have more rendering time that goes into it. And the work in progress animation looks like, where is it? Camera shake number 2. Looks like this, a little bit more fluid. You can't even make out the camera shaking, just a little bit if you pay really close attention to it. And as you can see, there are a couple of mistakes, some layers that really don't work together, but it would be too much time to correct them because the focus is here on the face anyway, and it works quite well for me. And imagine you have dust, wind, you have the sound of wind. So I'm quite sure that the eye will buy this animation. Anyway, enough talk. It's already 20 minutes. I actually plan to make this 10 minutes long, but I enjoy talking too much. All right. Well, thanks for watching. Thanks for your interest. Check out my Patreon if you want to support this project, or you don't have to support it monetarily, but you can share it if you like, and all the news, all the latest updates will either be on my Instagram or my Patreon page. All right. Peace out. Until next time.